Once again, I'm excited to be here. It's an honor, a privilege, and a pleasure to sit across from the CEO of the ADL. That's how I used to refer to him, but now I call him a friend, and my brother, the one and only Jonathan Greenblatt, here on Solutions. Man, how you doing?
I'm great. I'm really glad to be here this morning.
Yeah, likewise. I'm our guest on our Solutions to Hate or Not to Hate podcast is quite impressive. I mean, I've come across his videos on social media, but after having recently done a deep dive and understand that this young man is not even 21 years old yet, his birthday is closely approaching. Probably by the time this episode is out, he will be 21 years old. But he's already he's traveled the world. He has hundreds of millions of followers, billions of views. They call him a celebrity chef.
Yes.
And he's gonna break it all down, but just really, obviously here on our podcast, we're here to talk about, the journey of life, and you're still just starting, and you've already surpassed me, like in so many different ways.
All of us.
Yeah. I'll speak for myself. Like I'm looking up to you, and you're only 20 years old. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Eitan Bernath.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
So nice being here.
So
Thank you for
glad
having
you're
me.
here. Pleasure.
Man, I mean, Jonathan, you could probably jump in from the beginning, but I have so many questions. I mean, we've been, picking your brain before, everything even got rolling. And I gotta say, man, I'm super impressed with what you built and your level of poise and maturity. Just the things I was doing at 20, I was not having the type of conversations you're having.
Yeah, it's really like, Eitan, I think your story is really remarkable.
Thank you.
And I think it's remarkable how you have allowed your passion to sort of guide you, but what you've built. And I think the positive messages you're sending are really interesting. And, I want to talk like as a young person, as a Jewish person, how your identity has helped shape who you are. But like, tell us about your background, like where you're from, like where you went to school, and how you started walking down this journey of being
still going to school.
An influencer.
Yes.
You're still in school.
Yeah, I grew up in Teaneck, New Jersey, which is a super diverse town in Jersey. A huge Jewish population, huge Muslim population, huge Asian population, and many more. But I also grew up in a Orthodox Jewish community, so a very tight-knit community. Most of my friends were Orthodox Jewish. I went to Jewish schools, and so I had this really great upbringing, a lot of community. The Judaism and our identity was like a very central part of life. I went to Jewish school every day. We went to synagogue on the weekends.
So when you went to Jewish school, what does that mean? Because I think a lot of people who listen to our podcast don't know what Jewish school is.
Yeah, so it's a dual curriculum school. So 50% of the day we take secular classes, so math, science, history, reading, writing, all those type of classes. And then the second half of the day we take Judaic studies classes. So classes like studying the Bible, studying other types of Jewish law, other types of things to know about Judaism, and
like
learning
Hebrew?
Hebrew, learning how to speak and read Hebrew, which I didn't learn the most about, if I'm going to be honest. So it's a dual curriculum school.
Okay.
So the school days are quite long, but it makes it that you both get like a really great general education and then also, that Jewish education part.
Right. So like the Jewish education part, like we talk a lot, I think, in the Jewish faith about critical thinking and argument and reasoning. Was that part of your kind of learning process?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think, like Gemara, which is like the study of like Jewish law, it's, kind of like the joke, like you have 10 Jews, 12 opinions.
Right.
Like we love to argue, like, you'll read these pages of the Gemara and it's like, we're talking about like which shoe to tie first, and there's like 10 rabbis with like different opinions. And so it definitely makes you have to learn about, critical thinking and like analyzing, and also like to question things, which I think is important. I think definitely my upbringing, has affected a lot of like who I am. Aside from, being a proud Jew and all that, I think, I'm someone who cares a lot about, other people and care about a lot of causes. Even when I was like 11 years old, I'd raise money to help try to fund women's education in India. And like I think growing up in the community I grew up in in that Jewish community, you have a lot of very strong values. I think it instills in you.
So, like, was the community diverse Jewishly, or was everyone sort of Ashkenazi, Orthodox Jewish, and?
I wouldn't say it was that diverse. I mean, there was definitely. I mean, the overwhelming majority are Ashkenazi Jews, but there's like a hefty, probably 20%, maybe a little less, maybe a little more, that are like Sephardi Jews or other Jews of color.
Got it.
So I got a two-part question. I mean, because coming from such a close-knit community that supports each other, at what point did you go outside your community and experience, the rest of the world and other cultures? And then during that experience, was there any adverse or any experiences that you saw that were like, oh wow, like people view me differently? Because when you probably come from a community where everyone is very similar, same beliefs that look alike, and at what point did you step out there? And I wouldn't say did you experience any racism or defamation, but even something where people were like, oh, that was a stereotype, or oh, someone prejudged me because I was Jewish. What was the first experience to where you said, ooh, America is different?
Yeah, so actually an interesting thing about my upbringing is my next door neighbor, so I didn't actually grow up in like the Jewish area of the town. So my next door neighbor was a Muslim Indian family. And then the other neighbor on the other part of the block was a Christian or Catholic Dominican family. There was like a Pakistani family. And
so
our
your
backyards
actual
were
neighborhood
connected.
was diverse?
Yes, yeah. Like the closest Jewish person lived by us was probably like a fourth a mile away or more.
Really?
No, probably like half a mile. Like we didn't live in the Jewish area.
Of Teaneck.
Yeah, of Teaneck. So all our backyards were connected. So every day after school and on the weekends, like we'd be in our backyards all hanging out. And
that's cool.
Pretty neat.
yeah, one of my like best friends my whole life, Heba, was my next door. Her family still lives there. Next door neighbor. We're now both live in other parts of the world or the country. And but so I grew up in their house, and so they grew up in our house, and so. While I lived in a tight-knit Jewish community, like actually at home, like I would spend, time in Heba's house and around her family, and like, they'd be dressed in their Indian garb or celebrating Ramadan or Eid.
Right.
Easter, my Dominican neighbors would be celebrating that, and so I kind of had like a diverse. All the families would joke we're like a little like United Nations because like everyone was from a different country.
That's really cool.
And that was like a very like heartwarming like nice, exposure to the outside world. But I think also, living so close to the city, I think, like my earliest memories of, experiencing any form of like bigotry or hatred towards like my religion was, just like growing up right by the city. Teaneck's like right over the George Washington Bridge. Is, coming to the city, and like I remember, I don't know how old I was, but relatively old enough to like go in the city with friends by myself, but young enough that I don't remember the exact age. We were in the subway and we were all wearing kippahs, the Jewish religious hat, and I remember someone came up to us and started like yelling at us, saying to us like, "Oh, you're not the real Jew, like you're a fake Jew."
Wow. So and you were kids.
Yeah.
Wow.
And they were touting like a lot of the beliefs of like the Black Hebrew Israelites.
Right.
Yeah.
And like, oh, like you're a fake Jew, like take off your kippah, like you're not really Jew. Like,
And this was an adult black man
yelling, at
little
four
children.
like little scrawny Jewish boys. And
From Teaneck.
Pick these fights differently, guys.
Yeah, and we were like, maybe we each weighed like 120 pounds soaking wet. And I think that was one of the first times I could vividly
And then
remember.
it felt like these people were like they're an adult talking to children, which is
Yeah, it was like, pick on someone your own age.
Yeah,
Like
if you
we
want
were
to
like
have
probably
a
like 12.
religious debate, do it with an adult. But did you feel attacked? Is the question?
Yeah. No, I think growing up Jewish, you know about anti-Semitism, especially, with the recent waves of like very public anti-Semitism, whether it was coming from Kanye West or Kyrie Irving, like a lot of people outside the Jewish community were surprised, like, oh my God, I don't think that many Jewish people were that. Like, it was just like, this, like, we know this happens.
We see this.
And so I think, like, it was definitely the first time I experienced it. It was like, it was scary, having having any adult yell at
Right.
a child
in the subway, at least. Yeah.
let alone for like a religious-based
Right.
reason. But I think it was just like, it was something that your parents always be like, oh, be careful. Like, sometimes like, if it's nighttime, maybe take off your kippah and put it in your pocket.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I feel like just, it's a thing growing up Jewish, that,
Those sentiments are out there. And
yeah, and I think it's an interesting thing about, it's something that I try to talk sometimes on my platforms about is, being an Ashkenazi Jew in the U.S., we are white passing.
Yeah.
Right now I'm not wearing anything identifiably
Right.
religious. I can walk down the street and, live as a white man and experience the privileges that come with that. But the second I walk into a synagogue, or the second I put on a kippah, or the second I put on a Jewish star necklace, like I wear often, then that goes away.
Yeah.
It obviously doesn't go away 100%, but all of a sudden you become a target, and I think it's a very interesting thing growing up as an
Well,
Ashkenazi
that's the thing
Jew.
that Jonathan and I talk about this all the time, is the fact that you kind of get to dance in both worlds,
Yeah.
and that could be detrimental because of the identity that
Well,
you.
it's super interesting. I mean, I
Yeah.
think this was Whoopi's point.
Yeah.
Right, Whoopi's point, Whoopi Goldberg.
Goldberg.
When was that? Year ago, a little over a year ago. And she made the point that, a Jewish person can walk down the street and the Nazis or the KKK won't come after them, they'll come after me. Of course, all Jews aren't white. Of course, a lot of Jews, or a number of Jews, are wearing kind of some identifiers.
Yeah.
But if you're not wearing those identifiers and you are white presenting, hard to know the difference. On the other hand, what's so interesting is, I think, as a Jewish person, you are always aware of your vulnerability.
Yeah.
Oh,
So whereas you can show up and blend and kind of even code switch and be like
That's,
everybody
the word.
else,
That's what I was thinking of.
Yeah.
the reality is you do have either your kippah is literally in your pocket or it's figuratively in your pocket, because you're keeping this part of your identity down.
Yeah,
Right.
and I think also something that's interesting about it is that as a white passing Jew, I think the idea of kind of having your toes dipped in both kind of circles there is that you can forget sometimes. I think
Right.
sometimes it could come up on you, but I think I would be shocked if every single Jewish person hasn't tried to. Every single white passing Jew has not at least one time, if not many times, had to hide their Jewishness.
Yep.
And I think it's interesting because also I feel like it's a very new phenomenon just in the U.S. In Europe, when we lived in Europe 50 years ago, 60 years ago, 70, well, probably longer than that. When we lived in Europe, before World War II, we had the same complexion, but to Europeans, we looked Jewish. And I
Yeah.
think this idea that Jews look white is really a U.S. thing, or a new thing. In Europe, whether it's our noses are a little bit bigger or different facial
You're
features.
like dark hair,
Yeah,
dark eyes.
yeah, the idea that Ashkenazi Jews can kind of step into whiteness is an
that's
American
kind of
thing.
where all of it started, because they were trying to, what's the term of eugenics is they wanted blonde hair and,
Right.
and blue eyes,
Yeah.
and that's so your identifiers were technically the opposite of that. So
That's right. Yeah, and it is interesting. I mean, I think race, like America, because of its legacy, in terms of what happened to indigenous people, who were living here before the Spanish or the French or the English showed up, killed them all, or the African people who were enslaved and brought here on boats to kind of build essentially the industry of the country.
or the refugees who escaped, Europe and all of those other places.
Well, but what I was going to say, I think this European white versus, if you will, indigenous or black people is this original sin that America still grapples with. It's still not figured it out.
Yeah.
So when we talk about race in America, it is inevitably seen through that prism. What's interesting though, when you go to Latin America, right, there it's super different. There you have indigenous people and just white people, and there is constant tension there in a different sort of way, because it wasn't about the enslavement of black people there. Or in Europe, those issues of race often are about Jews. Are they a different race? Or these other people from North Africa or from Sub-Saharan Africa or Asia who come there more lately. So race is this cultural construct that's different
Yeah,
in
wherever you
different
go.
Different regions.
contexts. I
Yeah,
think.
and that's what I would even like to ask Eitan a little bit more about this new generation's experience, because even having you experiencing your first bigotry on the subway in New York City, but you had been warned, or you had been prepared for it. But being that you are a huge social media star, and I scrolled through your comments. Your comments are nothing like mine. Most every one of your comments likes you. But do you feel like, because that's the new subway of today?
That's right.
At least for me, like I'm probably amongst the most people and probably even hear the most voices when I'm scrolling through the comments or I'm scrolling through Twitter, and to me, I personally see so much bigotry and stereotypical assaults, really, just based off of people are hiding behind a screen. People get a chance to say what they want and never, things that they probably would never say in person. But being that that's your main platform most of the time, have you experienced any bigotry and things in that nature? And if so, how do you deal with it?
Yeah, so the comments looking without bigotry there's work that goes into that.
There's a lot of people erasing and deleting.
Yeah, so my theory with that, so to answer your question, the short answer, yes, I receive a lot of mostly anti-Semitic bigotry online. Now, the platforms have caught up with, being able to add, comment filters and different things like that can help.
Certain words that can be used.
That kind of trigger like, oh, hey, maybe let's not show this comment. And so my kind of theory is, being a openly Jewish person online, the two kind of sections of anti-Semitic kind of themes, if you want to call them, you get is like, it's kind of with all anti-Semitism, there's like the kind of white supremacist anti-Semitism that you get, and then there's the like Israel-related anti-Semitism.
Right.
And a big thing is being Jewish, you will get comments online, free Palestine, no matter what you do.
Right.
Whether if I'm making a recipe, making a arugula salad, and
Free Palestine.
yeah, exactly. And then it goes more than that. It becomes comments that are Israel ethnic cleanses. As a Jew, you need to denounce that. And so my theory with that is, if I make a video about Israel and someone comments free Palestine, good for them. That's healthy dialogue. Do I think commenting that's going to do anything? No, but I think, okay, that's their freedom of expression. If they're commenting on my post, Israel ethnically cleanses, blah, 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 all these lies, or Israel's committing genocide, which the definition of genocide is the population goes down. The population of Palestinians has grown ginormously over the course of the state of Israel, so that is just an incorrect piece of misinformation. That I'll take down. And I have certain words like that turned off because I don't want someone to go to my video and then learn that piece of information.
So you're using filters basically on your video about making arugula salad. So if someone says free Palestine, it will come down.
Yeah, and well, it's also like on that. Like if I'm doing a video about Israel, I will have the filters less because that's if I'm bringing up the topic, then it's an appropriate time to discuss it.
So this is interesting. Just to pause here for a second, I think, Nick. The idea that as a Jewish person, talking about arugula salad, or whatever.
Cinnamon buns.
That you get, like, people start saying free Palestine. That would be as awful, in my opinion, as if you're someone who is Latino or Mexican American, and you're talking about, I don't know, whatever, the time of day, and someone starts coming at you about what's your position on the drug cartels in Mexico.
Right. And that would be so incredibly racist.
Obviously, or
a Chinese person with the Uyghur Muslim population, with the Chinese government.
So, like,
that would be so racist if someone
you
did
would
that.
never, like, there's just no question that guilt by association is totally wrong. So why is it permitted? Why do you think it's been normalized, the context of Jewish people? Or why do you either?
Yeah, because I could probably answer that because, I stepped on a few landmines.
Yeah.
When I think, and this is just offering this up, from a perspective of a disenfranchised community.
Right.
There's always the power to be. And there's this idea of speaking truth to power.
Right.
Especially when you believe power is corrupt power.
Right.
From information that you received or what you've been
Right.
taught. And that literally is, some of our greatest discourse is like, well, who holds the power?
Right.
Because ultimately, the Jewish community says we're not the ones with the
Right.
power, but from the outside looking in, especially I'll speak from, the black community and even some of the, Hebrew Israelite banter, and what they believe to be true, it's all rooted in the Abrahamic faiths of that we all originate from the same space.
Right.
So, and again, I can't really speak to the actual Israel comments and stuff, but I have seen them and I do understand it. But I believe that they don't see anything wrong, because even in the things that I was, pontificating about were really like, I thought it was empowerment of our community. And because, there's so many tropes and things that I didn't know were hateful at the time,
Right.
or where it rooted from, I just took them as factual.
Yeah.
Like the idea, like to that whole identity of your subway experience. I grew up thinking, and I'm in a very religious household, but I grew up believing that black people were the original Hebrews.
Right.
Now, I didn't grow up thinking that, the other Jewish community were fake.
Yeah, so that's the thing.
Yeah,
like you
yeah,
can
like-
believe, have this self-worth, this set of beliefs, which I think is fine until it implicates you in marginalizing,
Yeah.
like another group of people.
Right.
We're the real ones, and you're not. And that goes for the Jews too.
Yeah.
Like it's interesting. I recently attended a Black Israelite service. Black Hebrew Israelites are the people in front of Barclays, screaming at Jewish people.
Yeah.
People whose movies Kyrie was promoting.
Right.
There's also Black Israelites. There's a big community in Dimona, of like American.
I think they're
African-Americans.
Black Hebrews is because I think
I think they call themselves Black Israelites.
Yeah.
It's complicated and
Probably
confusing.
both, yeah.
Yeah, but even like I have friends that are Black and Jewish.
Right.
And or even like someone who actually live in Israel, like Amari Stoudemire,
Sure.
who played.
Amari is halachically Jewish.
Yeah.
Means by like traditional Jewish law, he's Jewish.
Right.
Tiffany Haddish, who's a friend, right? I think her dad is Eritrean Jewish, right? Again, whereas the guys outside of Barclays they self-identify as Jewish, but it's not a kind of Judaism.
Yeah,
that looks
they're
anything like
they're their own spiritual group, their own religious practice that is definitely a disciplined religious group. But it's there's some levels and some thoughts. Again, I've had them support me. I've had them against me. And their levels of study, their things that they preach. It's a very small knit community, and they're serious about what they believe, so much so that you'll be in front of Barclays, or they'll be,
But like it's okay to be serious about what you believe, and it's okay to be self-disciplined. The problem is when that prompts you to scream at 12-year-olds on the subway, right? Or that prompts you to kind of go after people who, again, may present as white, who you think are imposters.
Right.
And and while that may seem innocuous, that may seem mild, harass people walking out of Barclays, you take that to its extension, and there's some guy with a gun who looks for Zionist businesses and then goes to a supermarket in Jersey City and kills 3 people.
Well, what I was going to say. It seems like your community, like the Black community, but specifically when it comes to anti-Semitism, is always on alert and always because you're constantly being attacked, whether it's online, whether it's in the subway. These tropes and this energy of bigotry is a constant, but it's almost to the Black community. We just see you guys as white people, so
That's right.
Yeah.
so we're not like what are they mad about,
Right.
and it's interesting because even in through my journey, I almost got to that space of just like I'm speaking truth to power.
Right.
And even now, it's like, one, to be able to speak truth to power, you got to actually have the actual truth. And in that sense, I was like, okay, well, I don't want to just repeat something because I heard it from somebody on the corner, or because somebody gave me a pamphlet, or because I can retweet or repost a documentary, or, those things. Because I feel like everybody wants to be proud of what they are, and when they receive new information about their culture, they want to share it, especially coming from a culture where information has been kept from us for so long. And when we're doing everything, even in the school systems, they don't want to talk about actual history, and they want to.
But it's funny when you talk about that. Like, it leads me to think about these perceptions of power, right? Like you, Eitan, like have a kind of influence that's a kind of power in some ways. Like your videos get extraordinary amount of views. We have big hopes, by the way, for this one right here.
Just tag us, Eitan.
Get the Eitan halo,
some of that
the
love.
Eitan effect.
Yeah.
But I wonder, like, how do you think about that power that you have, that influence, and how do you use that for good, whether it's on the content you're doing, or also just, again, back to issues of identity as a Jewish man?
Yeah, well, I think just also the comment saying you said, Nick, that I think, it's an interesting thing is, especially in the U.S., there's perceptions that Jews, run media and run all that entertainment. And what I always find very interesting about that is, when Jews immigrated to the U.S., we weren't allowed to work in most industries. And one of the only industries we were allowed to work in was entertainment. And so, I think it's very easy, looking at entertainment, a lot of very big people in entertainment are Jewish. A lot of the people who are, who run big entertainment companies happen to be Jewish.
Yeah.
And I think that it's very easy to then, make that connection of, oh, okay, that's, an intentional thing that they're all Jewish, or that's, a conspiracy is, that's how that gets turned. And, I think with looking at the history, it makes a lot of sense why there's a lot of Jews in entertainment. And I think that that's an easy kind of line for people to then, kind of flip and turn into something to easily.
But I think,
direct
and even
that.
speaking to that, I think Ozzie Davis, a very old school, legendary black actor.
I know him from all the Spike Lee movies.
Yeah.
Ruby D and Ozzie Davis,
Yeah, exactly.
right?
But he's that's when he was the OG already. But him and Ruby D were they were the Jay-Z and Beyonce of back in the day. And they literally were married to each other, forever. But he was a theater trained. He and Ruby D back in 40s, 50s, and they just grew through Hollywood as black royalty. But he said this about being, stereotypes are not bad unless the person who uses them turns them that way. So in that sense, it's the idea of there's nothing wrong with the journey and the truth and the authenticity of a disenfranchised community came and empowered themselves to dominate in certain industries, whether it's, I feel all right, when we start using that against your community, so whether it's entertainment, whether it's fashion, whether it's finance, these are spaces that are from the outside in look like the executives in that space happen to be Jewish, but when it's tied into
it's weaponized.
Yeah. So, but my question is as a 20-year-old, and one, a very well-versed and intellectual 20-year-old, but even the average young people your age, are they thinking about all of those aspects when they're online or when they're making, because I also feel this next generation, even talk to your son a couple of times, he's he's more of the school of thought of everybody's the same.
Right.
You know what I mean? They don't know all of this stuff that we're sitting here talking about of the history and where it comes from until they're faced with their first bigoted experience. And so I always wonder, how are my kids gonna, they're definitely privileged, they're definitely unique, they're definitely, in the public eye. When's gonna be their first experience when someone's gonna say, no, you're lesser than? No, I don't care who your dad is, I don't care, your skin is black, therefore I'm gonna treat you differently. Or even now, because you're mixed race, or you're even the ideas of, I've recently been experiencing a lot more of the colorism, even within our own community, of how one is treated differently because of your complexion. So
You're not black enough. Basically.
yeah, or even like even the identity, like what is black is an entire new concept, because before, everybody from Barack Obama to, Bob Marley, all of those people were considered black, but under these new guides of colorism, like, well, if both of their parents aren't black or they didn't come from an enslaved, lineage, are you now still, technically can wear the jacket of, proud black culture in America? So those are debates that we have within our community, which I know even with, different, there's also class aspects within the Jewish community from, Orthodox.
And these issues too, these ethnic issues too, right?
Yeah.
Like, if you're an Ashkenaz, all the religious leadership, well, not all of it, but if you look at the heads of the conservative, like the different religious streams in Judaism, right? The Reform movement, the conservative movement, the Orthodox movement, they're all Ashkenazi Jews. My wife is Mizrahi, and so her cultural context, she's from Iran, so they pray differently.
Yep.
The same basic stuff, but you show up in America, and the way that we think about Judaism, right, is kind of monocultural in some ways, and doesn't always accommodate for the own ethnic and the multi-ethnic and multiracial diversity of our own community.
Because that's the thing, and I'm sorry it took me forever to get to it, but that's the thing I wanted to come back and ask you. As that 12-year-old, when you saw this, probably very intimidating and adult black man yelling at you and telling you to take off your cultural garment that you had found pride in. One, was that your first experience with a black man? And then two, did that then in your mind make you think, oh, all black men think this way about me?
So growing up, we had a family we were very close with who were black Muslims who lived in Teaneck. So that was not like the first interaction I'd had, but I think for me it didn't make me think, oh wow, all black men are like that. But I think that unfortunately, when anyone experiences bigotry from someone, it can so easily make you have your own bigoted beliefs about the people that person looks like.
Facts.
And so I think for myself, that I think that was not my experience, but I think experiencing that, I think the kind of that switch of experiencing bigotry from someone and then you thinking that about their own group of people is a very tiny margin of how quickly you can turn on that. And I think that's a way how different marginalized communities in the US can sometimes turn on each other, is because, when you experience bigotry from a single person, like I think even an example is, I think, for Jews, experiencing, anti-Semitism from, different people who support like Palestine and the Palestinians, can sometimes make Jews, I think it's very easily for Jews sometimes to fall into, feeling like, oh, all people of the Muslim faith feel that way. And I was saying, I experienced growing up, sometimes you hear kids, say things and it's like, oh, like all Muslims hate us. It's like, no, like, are there some Muslims who do not support Israel and then, their lack of support of Israel turn into anti-Semitism? Yes, but like my best friend Hiba's Muslim. There's billions of Muslims on this earth who are even just within the Muslim community. I mean, there's Indian Muslims, there's Indonesian Muslims, there's Arab Muslims, there's so many. But something else that you said that I wanted to answer was in terms of like the newer generation. I think right now, growing up, kind of Gen Z, if you will, especially as Jews, in general, Gen Z has grown up in an age of school shootings and lockdown drills, and that is compounded as Jews because so I grew up in the Jewish community in like New York, New Jersey, and there's a system in place that I think is relatively public. So it's like exposing. There's a system in place that if a single one of the Jewish schools or institutions in a certain geographical area in New York and New Jersey is attacked, there's a system that sends out an emergency message to all the schools to go on lockdown. Wow. And there was
way, some of those
probably I would not be shocked.
Literally in this space.
That's what this room is for.
Yeah.
That's what this room is for.
So there
We're
was
tracking this and are sending out those alerts.
Yeah, so I mean, it may be for the. So there was a false alarm, I remember distinctly in high school, that a school accidentally set off. A Jewish school that was located less than a mile away from mine accidentally set off an active shooter alarm.
Yeah.
And our school went into lockdown. And we have lockdown drills all the time. Especially in general, schools right now have lockdown drills for active shooter drills. But going to a Jewish school where you're more of a target, every single classroom has a number on it that's also visible outside. You learn exactly where to stand. You learn. I was saying it was a personal fear of mine. I had a bulletproof backpack when I went to school. I was very scared.
That's the type of this generation. We have fire drills. They have lockdown.
After the Parkland shooting, I cried to my parents until they let me buy. I bought a bulletproof backpack.
To go to school.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
It's crazy.
And so that is, I think, for me, one of the scariest moments I remember in my life. I was in the cafeteria, and usually when there's lockdown drills, you kind of know it's coming. They try to make a surprise, and the principal got on the loudspeaker, very visibly terrified in his voice, and said, the first school is under lockdown. And you could just tell, the teachers around were terrified, because they usually know. And we were, we rushed into, this room to hide, that we knew was, the hiding room for lockdowns when you're in the cafeteria. And I remember I had my backpack, I was, holding in front of my heart and brain. And I remember the principal got on and, said, this is not a drill. We have an alert, there's an active shooter. And I remember just the sheer, terror of being tons of kids around me were crying, their kids, siblings that went to that school. And so I think this generation, we grew up in a time where there is this mass violence and school shootings, and I think that it makes all kids in the U.S., but especially Jewish kids who, there's that extra level of target on your head, very aware of it. And I mean, that one incident, I will remember forever. Luckily, it was a false alarm, and after an hour, it was called off. But that was one of the scariest hours.
So knowing that you're dealing with that level of pressure, as a young person, and for you to step out on your own faith, step out in your own, gumption within, and say, not only do I want to create my own industry, and I mean, it's such a unique story, as starting as a teenager, becoming a celebrity chef, and now changing the world. I mean, give us a little bit about that journey, and then ultimately, from a joyful disposition, you really are traveling the world, changing the world, and bringing people closer together with your, with your food and your cooking and all your social media.
Thank you. Yeah, no. So the primary type of content I do is cooking content, food related, and it's something that what I love about food is brings people together. It was something that especially with my neighbors that I lived around, something that we would love to talk about and try each other's food. The food my mom was cooking in our Ashkenazi Jewish home was very different from what my Indian Muslim friend was cooking, or the Dominican family that lived there, or the Pakistani family. Right. And so for me, that's something that's what I love about food is that it connects everyone. And doing that on a global scale on social media is, I think it's a great way to bring people together, but also you reach a lot of people. And I think when I started, I wouldn't say I shied away from my Jewishness on camera, but I think something that Jews experience, I think is an interesting thing about our ability to step into whiteness is we've kind of tried to assimilate throughout history into different. Populations, whether it was in Europe when we were kicked out of Spain, when we were kicked out of Spain during the Spanish Inquisition, and we moved into France and into all these other countries, we had an ability to assimilate to a degree. And I think that's interesting.
To avoid being persecuted.
Exactly. And so we kind of stepped into that whiteness there. And I feel for myself when I started, I wouldn't say I hid my Judaism at all. Right. I wore a kippah, more when I was younger on camera. But I was kind of, I didn't do as much Jewish.
You wear a kippah on camera when you were doing your cooking videos?
Yeah, when I was young, I grew up in a more Orthodox community, and so I mean for the first many years I always wore a kippah on camera.
So I'm just going to say, pause. This is very rare.
Right.
Again, most Jews put that away when they try to be a part of secular culture. I'm not saying that's a good thing or a bad thing.
Yeah, because I would think that you're probably more widely accepted when you don't have it.
I think that's,
and then when you do have it, then
Yeah, I wore a kippah on Chopped when I competed when I was 11.
Bravo.
And for me now, as a growing adult, my own Jewish identity grows as I grow. I wear different. I have to have it on now because it doesn't look good with this shirt. But now I choose to wear more like Jewish identifiers, like a Star of David, and I'm a human who evolves. But for the many first years of being on the public eye, a kippah was how I identified myself Jewishly. I think what comes with that is, a knowledge that, you will receive that anti-Semitism and all those different things. But I didn't do that much content about being Jewish. I think also having to be like, Ashkenazi Jewish food was not my favorite food. I love my mom's
Why,
cooking,
you didn't like cholesterol? Like, why? You didn't want to raise your blood pressure? Like, why not?
Yeah. So that happened to me, but then I think also as I've gotten older.
I happen to love Jewish food.
Yeah, now I appreciate it more. But I think as I've gotten older, I now, in the past few years, I think I've realized, leaning into my Jewish identity even more is like a real strength.
Yeah.
And I think something also that's really important, especially on social media, but in all forms of entertainment, being, different and unique is actually good. And obviously in Hollywood, there's like the models who everyone wants to look the same, but beyond that, like your identity and who you are and your unique story is important. And so I think also as I've gotten older, I think I've realized, I feel empowered to do help for the Jewish community and to be an advocate. And I already have these platforms. Most of my following is not Jewish. And so, for example, on Holocaust Remembrance Day, I did a video, what is the Holocaust? Or what was the Holocaust? And just explained, what the Holocaust was. And 6 million Jews were killed. This was during World War II. Jews were killed in gas chambers. Jews were also killed by the Einsatzgruppen, who would just go into towns, round up the men, and shoot them in a ditch they just dug themselves.
Right.
And so I've realized, I can do that Jewish advocacy, and for the way I see it, something I know we've spoken about when we had our call a few weeks ago, I've always done different advocacy for different things on my social platforms, whether it be, I'm, adamantly pro-choice and, it's a woman's right to choose, or, various things, social issues that I feel strongly about. And whenever you stand up for something in the public eye, there's going to be backlash. The way I see it is, if you have to stand up for something, there's obviously people that disagree with it.
There's the opposing side.
Exactly. And I feel, in entertainment especially, it's a business. Like, I care about these things, but at the same time, I have employees, I have, a business to run. And
these are taboo topics.
Yeah, and you have to take calculated risks.
Yeah.
Every time you stand up for something, it's a calculated risk of how much can I lose? Will this hurt the business? And, no matter how much you care about something, at the end of the day, you have to pay people's salaries.
You got to make payroll.
You got to make payroll, exactly. The way I see, Jewish advocacy and fighting anti-Semitism is, I will be Jewish until the day I die. I will support the existence of the state of Israel until the day I die. I can be critical of Israel. I don't agree with everything Israel does. I don't agree with 50% of what the U.S. does.
Right.
But for me, that calculated risk of however many thousands or tens of thousands of followers I lose, doing Jewish education or Jewish advocacy, I don't care. And to me, that's a risk that is always worth taking. And obviously, all causes are important, but things come and go with different social causes and things, and it's important to take those risks. And I truly think a lot of people on social media are scared to stand up for anything, whether it be during the Black Lives Matter protests a few years ago, or whether it be for a woman's right to choose. And the way I see it is like, if you have that platform, like I think it's a responsibility.
Thanks.
Like, silence, and also like silence is complicity.
Right.
And I think also now consumers, like, people who stay silent during those huge cultural moments, whether it be this summer with all the Black Lives Matter protests, if you were a non-Black creator in the U.S. and you weren't commenting on that, like, your silence was complicity.
Yeah.
Like that's just, you cannot avoid that. And I think also consumers
especially when
care
the
now.
Majority of the entire country was rallying together.
Exactly.
And you say nothing.
It's a statement.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The non-statement's a statement.
Your lack of statement is a statement. And I think also as consumers, people care about that now.
Right.
People are kind of tired of following people on social media who, just like the world's okay. Like, no, like
there's no authenticity there.
People want to support people who care about
Who
things.
feel.
Yeah. And
But it's so funny because isn't this such like, there's this cultural war that's also happening where people have different sides on that. And so what you might feel can alienate someone.
Yeah.
What they might feel can offend you.
Especially if we're talking in the spaces of like identity and
Faith,
gender,
race,
Yeah,
politics,
yeah.
gender.
I do find that like a solid 70% of people are in the middle ground.
Yeah.
I think the silent 70% of people are so outweighed by the 15% on each
Well,
side.
I mean, that's every political
Yeah.
race.
pretty
You
much.
know what
Yeah.
I mean? It's
Pretty
like
much.
you have the extremes trying to convince the people in the middle to come on their side.
Exactly.
So, but I mean, you make some outstanding points, even about people just being complacent or just non-confrontational.
Yeah.
You know, these are heavy topics that. You know,
Totally.
I don't want to talk about at the water cooler with my Jewish friend. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I just want to love my Jewish friend, but
Or someone says, I just want to watch the video
Yeah, yeah,
and learn how to
yeah.
make
I get that a lot. Like stick
cinnamon
to
buns
cooking.
and,
Yeah,
not,
yeah,
and
yeah.
not hear your politics. They may
Yeah.
say.
I get stick to cooking comments all the
stick
time.
to cooking
to
is
cooking.
just as offensive as shut up and dribble.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And my response, my response to that always is, and I feel like it's a response to basketball players I've gotten that is,
Yeah.
I'm a human.
Yeah.
I'm not a robot that cooks food.
Yeah.
Right.
And they're not
You're not
they're
the
not
Chat
robots that
GPT of
they're,
food.
exactly they're not robots that can dribble a basketball. You
Yeah.
know, they're humans who experience the world and life and have feelings.
And then it's like, to your point, there's both sides, because if you don't say anything, then there's, well, why haven't you spoken up about this? Or why, why haven't we heard you speak about this? And then so even from your own culture, they're like, yo, you have
So
a
funny.
huge platform. We need you to speak up for anti-Semitism.
Yeah. Which I think also in the public eye, like, I think an important thing always to accept, I know I'm preaching to the choir, is nothing you ever do will be enough for anyone.
Exactly.
And so I think, making sure that you feel good about what you're doing.
But
is
does that
important.
happen? To build on what Nick said, do people ask you, hey, speak out on
Oh.
this?
Oh, yeah.
Or they expect you to show
I
up
get
on something?
Oh, yeah. I get like some very harsh criticism from the Jewish community relatively often. Of like, why aren't you doing more, or why aren't you talking quicker? And I think especially with Israel, it's a thing that Israel is such a complex issue.
Right.
Nothing there is black and white. Everything is complex, and when there's events that will happen, or not events, when there's incidents that will happen, it's very quick to like, oh, like, why aren't you saying something already? It's like
saying something positive about
I'm
Israel.
in the
Yes.
middle of
defending it.
cooking.
Yeah, well that, and also to me, I think it's important, like, obviously when there's big events or moments or things that happen, it's important to comment on it if you're in the public eye, but it's also important to like think.
Yeah.
And I think
And get all the information.
Yes, and I think it's very easy to quickly reshare something to your story
Yeah.
without
I wasn't
researching.
thinking when I was 20. You're so
And-
wise. I was just
Yeah.
saying shit.
And
Right.
and even like when you look at like what Kyrie Irving did, do you think he watched that movie?
Of course he didn't watch the
Or
movie.
did someone say to him, hey, you should post
Kyrie
this?
might have watched that movie.
It's a 3-hour movie. So
Kyrie
you
might have
think so?
watched that shit.
So maybe he did, but
But there's a
Kyrie's
reasonable
the
probability.
exception.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think
Yeah.
Kyrie's the exception to that. I think that people are so quick
Yeah.
to just reshare things.
But that's the thing, because one person, and I actually talked about this on one of my other shows, is someone who's a close friend, is Deshaun Jackson, who, in his, I know he didn't know.
Can you tell who Deshaun Jackson is for a
So
time?
Deshaun Jackson, one of the greatest wide receivers in professional football, like currently, like
Yeah, he's
especially like when
extraordinary
he got into trouble, top of his game, and he reposted a quote that ultimately was from Hitler. I know for sure that he didn't necessarily. He literally said, I believe it was his younger brother or something, was doing an African American study class, and it was just talking about his quote was under the guidance of they took something that was like, if black people would stick together, they would have more power.
Yeah.
That's what he thought he was putting into the universe.
Right.
Unpack it all, it was like a complete trope that was started from Hitler. But then again, to see the backlash that it created so much controversy. The man, almost lost his job. But then now you have this other community saying, right on. And it's like, wait, I was just, so you do have to know, even like myself included. Again, mine was probably even a little bit more purposeful because I thought I was speaking truth. I thought I knew what I was talking about and had no idea or concept of the tropes and the things that I was saying because I thought I was empowering our people. So there's really interesting space, especially for the black community or anyone. Like, we all want to seem so smart. We all want to seem so intellectual, especially when it comes about our own personal culture. So then when And if what it is we believe to say, you're keeping us from the truth, you're hiding the truth, then that then puts the community in which we're attempting to speak to, that kind of makes you all powerful.
Think about where you were when you were 20
Yeah.
or 21. And I think about where I was when I was 21.
Right.
Now, you were a public person when you were 21.
Yeah.
You know, I most definitely was not. You are extraordinarily. And like the pressures upon you and the expectations upon you.
And how much growth has been for the last 20 years, and like I thought I knew everything then.
Of course, we all do. At 21,
Yeah.
you're sure you got all figured out.
Yeah.
Like your kind of humility is rare. But I
Yeah.
also just think, like, to be expected to be an expert on everything, and something happens, and you gotta say something right away, and you gotta get it right. It's just the expectations are crazy, and almost unfair. But I think with the challenges, like the Spider-Man quote, with great power comes great responsibility. So you have this influence, which is a kind of power, and then the question becomes, do you get informed so you wield that power responsibly? Because when you don't, it creates all kinds of implications.
I mean, I think like most bigotry comes out of ignorance, and I think there's obviously people that are just bigoted and just no matter what
But even that's
information they
rooted in
learn.
ignorance,
Yeah,
too.
and even that.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of times
There's either ignorance or self-hatred.
Yeah.
Those are the two.
And I think that a lot of times, especially on social media, when celebrities will reshare something, like I think most of the time that person has no idea what they actually
But
share.
not
Like
just
Dave Chappelle
everybody.
says, Ja
Or
Rule.
anybody.
No one cares what Ja Rule thinks in a time like this. It's
Right.
like they put the cameras on us, so we feel like we have to say something.
Exactly, and I think that's something that I know that I think you do really well, and the ADL, its organization, does really well. Is like, and you talk about in your book, is like the idea of teshuva.
Yeah.
Is that we
love
can
that word.
acknowledge the wrongdoing, and if someone shares something anti-Semitic on their social media in the public eye,
Yeah.
we can acknowledge that was wrong, that hurts the Jewish community,
Yeah.
and that has real-world effects, and that is part of the dialogue that leads to direct violence against Jews, while also acknowledging that, hey, that person who shared that probably had very little idea what they were sharing, felt the pressure to share things publicly because of their community, because of whatever that is, and they aren't an evil person for doing that.
Right.
They just are someone who should have been more careful, should now understand why that was wrong, and I think that that's something that you do really well, is that idea of teshuva, and it's an important value in the Jewish system.
It's why
Yeah.
we're here today, to be honest. I mean, from the hurtful things that I said, and I feel like the Jewish community embraced me on where it could have been, forget that guy, he's a bigot, he's anti-Semitic. Everybody that I know that, once close friends and family, said, nah, Nick's a great guy. And where I've probably had, more invitations and more experiences since then with, my fellow Jewish brethren to actually say, I've taken journeys and trips and things that I would have never had the opportunity to understand and walk with if it wasn't for that process. And I think that's a lot of times what we see, where even the teshuva aspect of it, where at least for our community, is almost looked at as a negative aspect, because it's like, oh, now they got you. You know what I mean? Like, now you're really under their power, they're under their control. It's like, no, it's called compassion. Like, it's
it feels
called
like
forgiving, but it's like, to us, it's like, oh, now they've silenced you. It's like, no, now learn what the reality is.
But it feels like empathy, forbearance, forgiveness. Like these are attributes that aren't valued in a culture,
especially in a
that's
social media
predicated on
culture.
social media, where again everything is rapid fire
and polarized.
Everything is polarized,
and that's how you get. We're rewarded for it.
That's exactly, polarization pays.
Yeah.
Right. It drives clicks and sensation. Like if it bleeds, it leads.
Yeah.
So we find ourselves in this doom loop that we can't escape. But like hopefully our podcast and hopefully people like you who demonstrate empathy and who model a kind of forbearance, like that gets us to a better place.
I think, again, I think that next generation, starting with the brilliance that sits among us to
Yeah.
our own children, like no one wants
Hopefully they're gonna
division.
get it right.
I mean, everyone wants to ultimately be able to coexist amongst each other. But I mean, we have someone.
But there
right
are
here.
bad people.
Yeah.
You said before that prejudice is mostly born out of ignorance or anti-Semitism. I definitely think there is intolerance that comes from ignorance. Like, I didn't know better. I
Yeah.
thought it was okay to say
Yeah.
that. What's a trope? All that kind of such. But I also have come to learn in this job at ADL,
Yeah.
there's also a kind of intolerance that's born out of evil.
But
and it's
then
real.
again, I think I said that's self-hatred, that's mental health, that's those are things that.
Or it's just people who think I'm gonna get by by getting over on you,
Right.
and who think Jews. I mean, unfortunately for the Jewish people, the anti-Semitism, whether it's been perpetrated and taken to an extreme out of ignorance, people who were brought along like sheep, the people behind it have made the Jews the scapegoat in order to hide their own flaws, in order to escape blame, in order to redirect negative energy.
Yeah.
And the Jews have been a punching bag for a long time.
For
Now, things
centuries.
thousands of years. Things are different here, thank God, lots of ways. But that's why I think Jewish people, I think it's almost epigenetic is the word,
Yeah.
that we are encoded in our DNA as a kind of vigilance. And I've come to learn, and I think you exhibit this, like, I swear, Nick, I think Jews hear at a different frequency. You know what I mean? You know how young people, you're
Right.
probably in this, you hear at a different frequency. Older people can't hear certain sounds. You lose that ability as you get older. Jewish people, they hear things.
Right.
And we detect things. And we know where that's coming from. Maybe black folks feel this way about a kind of anti-black racism, but I know Jewish people, what feels to somebody else like, well, that was just ignorant. We feel like over thousands of years we've learned about
attacked.
anti-Semitism.
You feel like that,
Yeah.
like that's what those tropes are.
We know where that's
because
coming from.
I mean, even you saying that is almost it can land in that space of stereotypes just because, but it's like I said, not all stereotypes are bad because there's nothing wrong with a group or a section of people being more aware than because of what their people have gone through, because black people, we experience the same thing. Like,
Sure.
I think we were sitting here with Stephen A. Smith one time and he was like, man, just every time I step out my house, I experience bigotry towards me, and these people are oblivious to like, oh, can I touch your hair? You're so, you know about basketball, right? Like it's like just things that our frequency we just like, and we just as a black community we laugh at it, we let it ride, but for the Jewish community, it's not really a laughing matter because as much as we're downtrodden on as black people, and there's a systemic issues that America was built on. For Jewish people, even beyond America, it's a defense. I mean, that's why this place was created and is needed for forever, because you guys are constantly on edge because
I think that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, because it's like, as much as we would like to be like, oh, that was the times of the Holocaust. No, they're shooting synagogues today.
Yeah.
Anti-Semitism is on a high, and it starts with rhetoric.
Mm-hmm.
And when you can teach a whole generation that these people are, because it's so weird, because for black people, we're looked at as lesser than.
Right.
Therefore, the masses can say, I'm gonna overpower those people. From the Jewish community, specifically in America, they're looked like as the secret keepers, the people who have dark meetings in amongst themselves and control all of them. So it's two extremes, but they have the same level of hate.
Yeah.
Because if someone is a bigot, if someone is an evildoer, they're gonna use those tropes, they're gonna use those stereotypes
whatever way they need
to say we got to get rid of all of the Jewish people because they're running our money, they're running the country from behind closed doors, and therefore we have to speak truth to power.
Yeah.
Or if they hate black people, then we're like, they don't belong here, they should go back to Africa, they're ruining the country, they're killing and shooting each other. So that middle group, who is also operating out of fear and ignorance because they want to hold on to their culture. So in that idea, if I was a, young white male who felt like I understand how I could be easily influenced, because I'm looked at as the one automatically, so I got to defend myself too. So I think everyone's operating out of fear. Everybody's operating out of defense. So as a young 20-year-old with a brilliant mind, this podcast is called Solutions. How would you fix these problems? What do you think when you're talking to the next generation coming up under you, your fan base is so massive. What do you tell them when all that we've talked about in this hour, how would you say, all right, this is a solution to these issues?
Yeah, I mean, I think information is power, and I think education...
Correct information.
Correct information. Yeah. I mean, all information is powerful, whether or not it's true or not.
Right.
But I think, factual information is very important, and I think, education's important. I think it's why, for example, in Florida with the book bans about, African American studies is so
critical
concerning.
Race theory,
And critical race theory is, which first off, 99.9% of people who don't support critical race theory can't define what it
even means. Man,
Yeah.
Everybody's too woke. What
Yeah.
does that mean? I don't know.
Literally, they can't even define it. And so I think, that's a perfect example of, just from an American history standpoint is, banning those books from schools and not allowing students to learn about the history of how, the black community was treated in America directly removes that information from students' minds, and then they can't understand the historical context of the black community today.
Why are they
exactly?
Why you guys so angry? Well, do you allow us to read the books that show that put us in this position?
And I think that's like it's an intentional thing. Those books aren't being banned for no reason. The powers that be are banning those for a reason. They know the power that information has. If people know what actually happened in the U.S., then they won't support their own political agendas. And I think that, in general with all forms of hate, or something that I try to do specifically with, trying to fight anti-Semitism, is educate people. And, kind of, the bullet of bigotry, if you can, stop, educate someone before they get penetrated by the bullet of bigotry, I think is so powerful. Because, the 70% in the middle who, don't have strong beliefs, are they going to first see a video about the Holocaust that Eitan Bernath made, where it explains, the Einsatzgruppen shot and killed men, there was the gas chambers, there was, the Nazis did this because of X and Y, or are they going to see a Holocaust denial video first?
Yeah.
What's going to penetrate their brain? Whether it's, about the black community in the U.S., are they going to be in school being able to read books that are history of the U.S., or are they going to see, a far right-wing, racist, anti-black talking head speak negatively about the black community? What's going to penetrate their brain first? And I think that, being able, obviously, the work the ADL does of like combating the bigotry is important, but I think what everyone can do is that education. It's something that I try to do with my social platforms. It's something I think that is important for anyone who has a voice to do is educate. If you can get correct information to people's brains first before they get hit with that misinformation, that has a big impression. First impressions are important. If the first time someone hears about a Jew is, Jews control the world, Jews, have the secret cabal, they're going to remember that. If the first time people hear about, black Americans is from a far right talking head that's speaking negatively, they'll remember that. And so I think education is important. And the way it's important is, if you look at Florida, is the people who are trying to, spread bigotry, they first start with books and information.
Yeah, that's like a historical truth, man. I mean, it's burning books, so to speak. Like, as a metaphor, it comes from a real place. Burning them, banning them, it's very Orwellian, it's very intentional. And look, I would say at ADL, like, our theory of change is you gotta protect communities in the moment, try to stop the extremists before they shoot the synagogue or bash the gay person or, beat up the Asian person, whatever it is. But in the long run, we believe that education and representation are essential, because you got to stop hate, but you got to build hope. And we think that education around issues of bias and bigotry are crucial, and it's also representation, making sure creating environments that are really inclusive, where there is a real kind of equality of ideas and heterodox views and people who are, again, multi-ethnic, multiracial, of various identities. And what I would just say, Nick, like right here, right now, is I think, Eitan, you kind of model both of those things. Both using your platform to educate people, but also the sheer act of showing up as an open Jewish person, wearing the kippah or the chamsa.
Being the light that you are.
It's a kind of representation. Yeah. And like, kol hakavod for doing that. I think it's really important, and I wish we had more of it, I really do.
Thank you.
And this has been a great conversation. I mean, so enlightening. Hopefully, it's helped many out there. Obviously, you're way surpassed us, but if you would like to share your social media handles of how people can see you, hopefully they're seeing us now on your platform.
Exactly.
But yeah, go
we
ahead
need
and
to tell
share
our
your
platform, our things.
Yes, you can find me anywhere on social media at Eitan, E-I-T-A-N, or Facebook and Twitter is at Eitan Bernath, my full name, E-I-T-A-N. My name is spelled nothing like it's pronounced.
Yeah. But I mean, in that sense, man, he has so many remarkable and amazing things on the forefront that are be coming up. So, I mean, we all know you now, but I think it's only going to get bigger and brighter for you, man. So, this has been amazing. Pleasure to know you, pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you for having me.
And this has been another episode of Solutions. Make sure you keep rocking with us. And you know, myself and Jonathan, as you will be able to see our handles on screen. But I'm at Nick Cannon. And do you have personal like?
It's just at
Just
J
Twitter.
Greenblatt ADL.
There it
that's where I
is.
show up.
There it is. Solutions to hate or not to hate. We know the answer. We'll holler at y'all next time.